Hello and welcome everyone to the This Is Not Therapy Hour. I am Brandon Tessers. I am a licensed therapist, but this is not therapy for many, many, many reasons. This is the This Is Not Therapy Hour. It's just a conversation, Q&A, back and forth. I don't know, whatever you want to call it. So I appreciate you guys being here. Um, a quick technical note for the last few weeks, we had some issue with Facebook not broadcasting the stream. It seems as though that is, hello in chat. It seems as though that is fixed now. So hopefully those of you who have watched on Facebook in the past and might have been wondering where it was for the last few weeks should be seeing this again now. Sorry about that. I'm trying to make sure that doesn't happen again. But yeah, for those of you who are here, if you are in chat, then you're part of the conversation. You impact me. You want to ask questions? Cool. You want to respond? Be part of the conversation. We go wherever we go, like any conversation. And I love having people in chat. Thank you, Kitch Squatch. So that I feel less like I'm speaking out into the void. It's more fun for me to know that there are other people on the other side instead of just having to pretend. I run a practice called Effective Artistry. It's a therapy and executive functioning coaching practice. That's our logo there in the upper right-hand corner. And we specialize in working with neurodiversity and executive functioning and creativity. But this is just about whatever. And we start with a topic just to make it easier to get things going, but we'll talk about whatever we want to talk about. It doesn't have to be related to the topic that we start with. And I actually didn't even remember to pick a topic today because I was trying to get it relinked to Facebook right there at the end when I normally would be picking a topic. So if anybody in chat has anything that you'd like to talk about off the top, feel free to throw it out there. Otherwise, I will just kind of start riffing on whatever's on my mind. But I'll give it a second. Just there's a bit of a delay on the stream, so I'll give it a second in case anybody wants to throw something out there first. I'm wearing my short sleeve shirt. Gonna try and pretend that it's summer, but really it's just that I forgot to bring a sweater into the office today, and this was in my office from last summer. So, all right, let's talk about imposter syndrome, because I actually had a question about that after last week's stream from somebody that was watching, and we've talked about it in the past. I don't remember how long ago, but probably quite some time, about a year ago or so. And you can go look that up if you'd like. I don't remember what all things that we said during that, but let's talk about imposter syndrome today. So just quickly to define what we're talking about with imposter syndrome, because it's a relatively, I feel like, well-known concept at this point. But not everybody thinks of it the same way, and not everybody is aware of it at all. Imposter syndrome is the subjective experience. It's the feeling of not actually belonging at some place where you are, in some role, in some capacity. You know, if you are a parent and you feel like you don't know what you're doing as a parent, and oh man, I must be screwing this up somehow, that's imposter syndrome. If you get a job and you show up and you think, wow, all my colleagues know so much about what we're doing here and I don't know anything, that's imposter syndrome. If you're saying, I think I must have just fooled everybody into thinking that I'm some cool, person, that all these friends I have that like me, they must not know the real me, that's imposter syndrome. Basically, it's when you're feeling like the way that people are perceiving you or treating you or thinking of you is different than what they should be, the reality of who you are. And I'm like putzing around with my hair, it's distracting me. I'm just going to put it all up. And specifically when you're thinking of yourself as undeserving of some good thing, some important or respectful thing that you're getting from other people. If you think that other people seem to think you're better than you really are, that's imposter syndrome. And it manifests in all kinds of different ways. I mean, you heard me just use a bunch of different examples there. I don't know why I'm getting so distracted by my hair right now. There we go. Maybe it's the short sleeve shirt changing things up for me in some way. It's kind of what it says on the tin, is when you feel like an imposter. And it can happen for all kinds of reasons, and it manifests in different ways in different scenarios. And I tried to kind of cover some different things there, because some of it is more emotional, right? Things like, everybody says I'm a good person, but am I really a good person? Some of it is more practical and observable stuff, like, oh man, I just got a new job or a promotion, or I was put in charge of this group. Hell, actually, like your first time DMing, if you play Dungeons and Dragons, your first time DMing, there's probably a lot of imposter syndrome going on there. Everybody agreed to you being the DM, and they want you to be a good DM, and oh no, I don't know what I'm doing, right? So it kind of goes all over the place. And it can happen for a lot of different reasons, but we'll start with kind of the most broad and basic, which is fundamental attribution error. It's a cognitive bias. It's often talked about as like the biggest or most important or most relevant cognitive bias. Fundamental attribution error, simply put, this is oversimplified, but simply put, it's the belief that other people are simple and I'm complicated. So what that means is if someone cuts you off in traffic, it's because they're a jerk who is selfish and doesn't care about people, and that's what they do. If you cut somebody off in traffic, it's because, I didn't see them there, or I'm actually this is important and I need to get there, or I didn't want to do that, but this other car over here was forcing me to do something and I had to do that. I'm sorry, right? It's also in the other direction. This is fundamental attribution error, right? Because that example there where other people doing something bad is because they're bad, but if you do something bad, it's because of reasons and reasons. But the flip side is a lot of what imposter syndrome about, which is when other people do good stuff, it's because they're good. And when I do good stuff, it's because of complicated reasons, that, that person who's very successful is just a good, valuable, successful person. I am successful, but only because I got lucky and I got this support here, and I just happen to know this thing, and I, am good at that particular thing, but really terrible at this. It's a version of what we call availability bias. Availability bias is equating the access you have to information with the relevance of that information, right? You have way more information about yourself than you do about anybody else. This is true for literally all of us, right? That all we know is our own experience. We know what we see other people do. We know what we hear other people tell us, and we can interpret those things. And I'm not trying to make it sound like we can't know other people, because I think we can, to whatever extent, what that word means. But even if we do, doesn't matter. My wife is a massive part of my life. My kids are a massive part of my life. And I didn't even meet my wife until 2010, so 12 years ago. I'm 36. So I've known her for 1/3 of my life, My kids, who are my whole world, the newborn is 5 months old, and I've known him for 5 months, right? So it doesn't matter how close you are, how well you know somebody, even within that span of time, those 12 years, right? Because I've known my mom my whole life, for example, but I'm not with her every second of every day like I am with myself every second of every day. Maybe I'm over-explaining something here, but I think it's kind of important to recognize that we are all, in a sense, the protagonists of our own story, right? That's the way our brains treat it, because we have no other choice. And maybe that was bad wording to choose, because there's also discussion around this idea of being the protagonist and being the person that's supposed to save things and whatever, which is a related but separate thing. What I'm talking about is, let's be real technical if we're going to talk about this stuff, right? There's something called Gestalt. When we're talking about perception, the brain doesn't perceive incomplete things. It fills in the gaps. So for example, if you close your eye and look with just one eye, what's actually happening right there is you have a blind spot. Each eye has a blind spot. It's the point at which the optic nerve connects to the back, and because of that, there can't be any like rods and cones there, right? But that's not very useful when we're looking through one eye to have just like a blank spot in the middle of everything. So instead, the brain looks at everything that's around that missing piece and just kind of fills it in with whatever it thinks is there. But you can, in fact, if you're probably on a computer or phone or whatever watching this, you can look it up. Go look up, blind spot test or Gestalt blind spot or something like. Gestalt is Gestalt, one of those fun German words. The brain uses information it has to fill in things that it's not actually seeing or hearing or observing in some physical sense. It's just kind of making its predictions, and for the most part, it's correct. But that's why all those optical illusions or auditory illusions are so fun for people, because they play on specific ways that the brain pretends like you're observing things when really it's kind of filling in the blanks. All this is to say, we don't treat other people as though they are partial people, right? If I meet someone, I understand that that person is a person, even though I don't know anything about them in particular, that they're complicated and people and blah, blah, blah. And so my brain is going to pull from information I have that seems relevant to kind of fill in the gaps about somebody. So this is partly where we get things like stereotyping, for example, or prejudice comes from this kind of stuff too, that as a way of simplifying, I don't know this person, but I do know people. So let me, reference my knowledge of people. And I do know, well, this person appears to be, a man, masculine presenting. So I can reference my knowledge about masculine presenting people or men. They're a teacher, so I can reference my knowledge about teachers generally. They're tall, so I can reference, etc. And we kind of fill in the gaps. And anything we learn about that person that turns out is different than whatever assumptions we were making when we were drawing on prior knowledge about them, we can change it. This is another, it's called the anchor and modify heuristic. We have our initial idea, concept of something, and we shift it in relation to new information, but we shift it the minimal amount that we need to in order to accommodate the new information. So, for example, if I think, teachers like denim is a stereotype in my head, right? And then I'm talking to a teacher and I find out they don't like denim. I'm not usually going to say like, no, you're a teacher and therefore I'm going to continue to believe that you like denim. I can modify, but until I have that information, until I have any reason to know that my assumptions aren't correct, the assumptions will continue. It's not an active process. It's not something we actively engage in or choose to do. Right now, each of us is making, well, I guess you could say infinite assumptions, because you could define those assumptions in different ways, but an unknowable amount of assumptions. Right now, all of us are assuming gravity is not going to cease to exist in 10 seconds, because if we thought that was going to happen, we'd be doing different things than what we're doing right now. So assumptions aren't things that you are actively saying, I'm going to assume this. It's just things that the brain is not paying attention to because it doesn't think that they need to be paid attention to. That only changes when it has reason to say, I guess I do need to pay attention to this. So we have kind of like rough sketches of other people and a lot of detail about ourselves. And it's not about accuracy. It's just about the quantity of information, right? It's not about saying I know and understand everything about myself. It's just, I know a lot about myself and my experience and very little about anybody else's. The concept that each of you have of me is a very tiny, small sliver of who I am. To whatever extent it's accurate, and let's assume that it is, that you listen to me and you see me and you have ideas about who I am that are relatively accurate. Even in that case, it's a tiny, tiny sliver of who I am. And same for me and you guys, right? So I kind of think of it sometimes, fundamental attribution error, as we're just filling in the gaps. We have an idea of the average person, right? But really our anchor for people is ourselves. We can never have as much information about other people as we have about ourselves. Another way of saying this kind of short is, unless I have reason to believe otherwise, I just assume everybody else's experience is the same as my experience of whatever particular thing we're talking about. My hair is really distracting me today. that's why it comes out to like the oversimplified version is I'm complicated, other people are simple, because we just insert ourselves, our knowledge of ourselves and our own experience into any understanding we have of them until and unless we have reason to change it, right? That's why we're often surprised. Well, one of the reasons we're often surprised when people do things differently than we would have done them. What is the relation with imposter syndrome? The relation between fundamental attribution error, thank you for the question, between fundamental attribution error and imposter syndrome is because with imposter syndrome, there's two sides of it. There's my idea of who I am or what I'm doing or what I know, what I'm capable of, right? And then there's also my idea of what I should know, what I should be doing, what I should be capable of. And there's a gap between those two things. I feel as though I am not capable of what I should be capable of, or I am not deserving of what I should be deserving of, what other people might think I'm deserving of or capable of. Well, where does that should part come from? It comes from our estimation, our observation of other people. Because how would I know that it's even possible to be different than the way that I am unless I've seen somebody else or observed somebody else as being different in that way? So effectively what happens is we watch someone else experience success and they're simple. So they're successful because they're successful. I experience success and I'm complicated. So I experience success because of the help I got, because I'm lucky, because this, because that. And I come away ending up thinking, man, everybody else knows something that I don't know. What is it? That statement, do you feel like, I feel like everybody else knows something I don't know. There's some secret everybody knows that I don't know. That statement is one of those statements that if you say it out loud, people will resonate. They'll be like, yes, I feel that way. As though it's like unique. When you're good at something but think that it's just a coincidence, yeah. There's a perfect example of this, right? Oh, that actually did go well on paper from the outside, from other people's observations. I did get an A or whatever, right? But I know what hell it was to go through to get that A. I know I got help from this person, that person, and I almost got an F and I barely sneaked by and I had to pull 3 all-nighters and whatever. So I don't value it as an A the way that I think other people probably do. But I don't question when I do that in reverse. I value somebody else's A and don't think about the fact that I might not know that they also needed help and they also had to pull all-nighters and went through hell and whatever, right? When you're good at something but think it's just a coincidence, that's one example of it, of imposter syndrome. It's really when you think other people think you're good at something and you're not. Yeah, will they find out I'm worthless? Basically, right? I'm a fraud. I can't let anybody know. It's honestly, talking about imposter syndrome this way, it's one of the most like fundamental problems that we have as humans, is this idea that other people, what's difficult for us is easy for other people, right? We're much more likely, generally speaking, to be able to say, I'm struggling with this that nobody else struggles with, than we are to say, I'm really great at this that other people struggle with. We do the second one too. Hopefully everybody does the second one at least a little bit. Of course, it varies, but it takes active work to do that. Because if I'm good at a thing, I don't notice the thing, right? If I'm good at it, whatever that means, it likely means that I'm not experiencing a problem in whatever area. If I'm good at math, for example, it means that when I try to do something that I define as being math, it goes well. And I don't really notice things that go well. I notice things that don't go well because that's what the brain does. But if people praise me for it, then it might call my attention to it. Especially it might start to clarify for me like, oh, it's unusual how quickly I was able to do that, or it's unusual to not be caused problems like that. Otherwise, these people wouldn't be calling it out. And that's where we start to get a sense that we're good at something. But it's not based in our own experience of it, because how would I know I'm good? That's a comparison, right? It originates in other people's feedback, their perception. So people will say a lot like, don't worry about what other people think. And I get obviously, usually when we're saying that, what we mean is try not to worry so much or blah, blah, blah. But it's A, not possible to not worry about what other people think. And B, if it were possible, it would be a terrible thing to do. How would you even navigate life if you legitimately paid no attention to how you impacted other people or whether they liked that impact or didn't, right? It's not that, we want to keep it in balance, but it's not possible to not do it. So imposter syndrome is, other people are telling me I'm good at a thing, but I know I'm not really. I think they're just fooled. And sometimes I have specific, that was a coincidence. I can point to the evidence. They think I know a lot about geography, but it just so happened that they asked like one weird geography question that I know. Slumdog Millionaire is a good example of this, right? I know that answer to that question for some unrelated coincidental reason, but because it's the only question they asked, they're just going to assume I know a lot about all geography. I don't know why I'm saying geography. Of course, reverse the position and you wouldn't know that about someone else either. So imposter syndrome is a comparative thing. It's when you're looking at other people, either at what you're thinking their experience is or what you think their perception of you is, and then looking at yourself and comparing that and finding yourself lacking in some way. How did I fool everybody? Why do they perceive me as being better than I actually am? Or, man, everybody else is really good at this and I'm not good at this. Why is that? And it really has I'm focusing so much on this because we tend to focus on ourselves. Fundamental attribution error. That's what we know most about. That's where we have the most impact. So if how I am or what I know or whatever, and what I think I'm supposed to know, if there's a gap between those two things and it's causing me distress, I'm going to focus on this part first. Crap, how do I learn all these things I'm supposed to know? How do I become what I'm supposed to be, etc.? And we can, depending on the scenario, we can do that. We can learn things and grow, and great. But we can also shift this part of it. What is it that I'm supposed to be? What is it that other people think that I'm doing, etc., etc.? I think that's why I did not dare to function on my level, always below my capabilities. Yeah, that's a very common, people will phrase it different ways. It stresses me out, yeah. Because if you do well, then they expect you to do well again, and you feel like you're disappointing them if you don't, right? People will talk about, well, if I don't try, I can't fail, or the underachieving former gifted kid, or whatever all these tropes and memes are, because it is a common experience. It's, I don't want to give people an impression that I'm capable of doing things that I'm not capable of doing, because in the past, I have had some experience where my perception is that they thought I was capable of doing something that I'm not actually, and it went badly. I disappointed them or whatever. Of course, still, that's all filtered through my perception. One way I like to talk about this is that a lot of people, especially people in my generation and younger, will say, I don't feel like I'm an adult. I don't feel like I'll ever be an adult, right? The implication being that there's something about other adults or other people that makes them adults that I lack. And especially when I'm working with young people who are getting ready to turn 18. Sorry about that train noise. I don't know why they're honking the horn so much. I was quiet as though I had muted, and I didn't mute, so you guys just got to listen to the train noise. Yeah, that 18 years old, at least here in the United States, is a big symbolic marker, and people will start to say, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm almost 18, or I can't believe I'm 18. I'm not an adult. I'm not ready. For some reason, people will always say, I don't know how to do taxes. Like, that's the one thing that gets thrown out as adults are supposed to know how to do their taxes. But I think the truth is that becoming an adult isn't about there's some discrete set of criteria that you can know or learn or whatever, and you got to learn all that, and now you're an adult. I think becoming an adult or feeling like an adult is just when you have an understanding that nobody else knows any better than you do, right? That everybody else is making it up just like you're making it up. Because how else would it be, right? Like, we have this, what do they know that I don't? It implies that they didn't learn in some chaotic, messy way like I'm learning. That somehow in advance, without any exposure to whatever thing we're talking about, they somehow knew exactly what they needed to know and prepared what they needed to prepare so that it all went smoothly. And that's just not how it works. You can check that. You can ask people, and if you have a good relationship and they understand you and feel safe with you, they'll tell you. I've never met anybody that would say, oh yeah, I've never made mistakes. I am always ready. Like, it's obviously ridiculous. We just don't think about it. We think that there's some secret, and that's why it's always called a secret, because it's not like they know this specific thing. They know how to blank and I don't. It's just they know something that I can't even define, because of course it doesn't exist. Everybody's experience, of course, is different from everybody else's, but there are certain universal things about being human. And one of those things is that you can't know a thing until you are exposed to the thing. Either you experience it yourself directly or somebody else shares it with you, right? So imposter syndrome, I find a lot more utility in trying to help with imposter syndrome in examining what it is that I think other people are doing, or what I think other people are expecting from me, or what are the standards, what's right, what I should be, etc. I find a lot more utility in that than in exploring what's wrong with me and what am I missing. Not because there's no point to exploring yourself or trying to develop things, like that's great and limited. There's only so much you can do. I can't be an expert in everything, right? So sometimes people will talk about, and I certainly feel this, the more expertise you get in a particular area, the more you realize that you don't know anything. That, like, I saw somebody post it as a joke that was like, me, an expert, talking about something outside of my field. And then it says something like, it's all so obvious and simple. Why aren't they doing blank, blank, blank? And then me as an expert talking about inside my field. Well, we don't really know anything, and it's very nuanced, but here are some things to maybe consider, right? Yeah. That maybe that other person, we're talking in the chat, maybe the person I'm comparing myself against does actually do better at whatever thing I'm talking about. Maybe I'm accurately assessing that, but losing the complicated factors that they're better at that because, like you're saying in chat there, they have parents that blank, blank, blank. They went to college. They work in a certain branch. They have a community that makes everything easier. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. 1,000,000%. No human does anything on their own. I say this to people all the time. You have never in your life accomplished anything entirely on your own, and nobody else has either. To distinguish it, to say that that is sometimes true, that we're accomplishing something independently, means that we're just arbitrarily determining what things count as help from other people or support from other people and what things don't. Because you, I, literally any human, if we actually were completely independent and had no help or support or connection to community, we would literally die. Of course, obviously, as babies and children, but even right now at this moment, I don't care what kind of a survivalist somebody is. You drop somebody someplace and say, okay, you can't have anything from anybody else. No tools, no clothes, no nothing. And even if somebody somehow had the knowledge that they needed in order to be able to create stuff just from scratch themselves in the natural environment, where did they get that knowledge? Where did they get that information? You can't figure it out on your own quickly enough to avoid some bad outcome, right? They learned. We as humans, we explore, we experiment, we learn things, we share things with each other. It's kind of the whole evolutionary advantage we have. So imposter syndrome, while there are variables that impact it, and we'll talk about some of that stuff, like why some people seem to experience it more than other people or more intensely than other people. Again, we can't know that that's true, but we can say that it seems to be that way. Certainly we can say that some people talk about it more than other people. Of course, that might be because they have language to notice it and other people experience it as something else and blah, blah, blah. But we'll talk about some of those variations. But at its root, it is a universal thing. I just became aware for some reason that it is possible to know something I don't know, or possible to do something that I don't do. Right now, I have no imposter syndrome about the idea that I can't fly just, without mechanical support, right? No problem with that. If for some reason I thought everybody else, or maybe even not everybody else, maybe just a good chunk of people could, now all of a sudden I'm feeling really bad about the fact that I can't. So we have to be exposed to something that's possible, but we don't currently know or haven't previously experienced in order to have that gap in the first place. That makes sense. And a big part of this sounds strange, sounds reverse, but one of the traits that makes it more likely that somebody would experience imposter syndrome is actually that they have been more successful independently in the past than somebody else, than other people, the average person. If I believe that I'm supposed to accomplish everything on my own, which of course is not actually possible, but for practical purposes, right? I'm not thinking about the fact that someone grew my food and made my clothes and whatever, right? That I wrote this paper on my own, that I built this shelf on my own, right? If I'm actually able to do that, if I say, ooh, I want to build a shelf, and I live in a culture, we all live, well, maybe not all of us, but at least in the States, and I would say the Western world generally, live in a culture that values individualism, call it hyper-individualism, this idea that being independent is somehow innately good or virtuous or whatever, that we should try to be more independent. I'm not saying we shouldn't at all, but we way over push it. So let's say we take 10 people and we give them as a culture the same message. You should be able to build a shelf and you should be able to do it on your own. And those 10 people go and try to build a shelf. If one of them, for whatever reason, is actually able to figure it out, maybe because of the resources they have access to, maybe because they have a different belief about how resilient they should be or how much they should push. And it's self-reinforcing. If I think I'm bad, I'm going to push myself more. But if one person is able to do that and the other 9 just aren't, well, those 10 people walk away from that experience, 9 of them saying, maybe I feel bad that I wasn't able to do it on my own, but I wasn't able to do it on my own. And then we have another experience and another and another. And if one person is able to do, I don't know, a significant portion of that on their own successfully and the others aren't, then the other 9 people are going to very quickly come to realize that saying do it on your own is something that we say but don't really do. Whereas the one person who actually was able to do a lot of it on their own is still believing that, oh, we're supposed to do it on our own. Okay. I'm mentioning this because specifically academics, school is a very particular set of, skills, behaviors, accomplishments, whatever. Is a pretty narrow range, honestly. Even when we're talking about like how widely varied fields become in academia when you get into college and grad school and whatever, and of course, very widely varied. But the process of academics, the process of navigating school and academia, there's not a huge variation in there. So if I take somebody who, for whatever reason, is more able to accomplish academic things independently and quickly, not needing support from other people, not needing to take a long time, then that person is more likely to think that that's what's supposed to happen. And because we overemphasize school and academics for pretty much everybody's childhood, right, until young adulthood, teenage years, generally speaking, because we focus on it that way, the people who are most successful in that environment will often end up being the people who later on, and we could frame this different ways, right? Sometimes when people are criticizing this, they'll say like, oh, they're soft. They're not exposed to failure or the real world or whatever. But I think a useful way to look at it is just they haven't realized yet that the whole do it independently thing is a lie. It's a thing that we say, but we don't actually do. And most of us kind of, realize that over time. Every time we're unable to do something on our own, it takes away from that a little bit. And that's certainly not the only variable. This is just one thing I'm talking about because I think it's a particularly important one for people who are probably here. This is particularly important for people who identify as neurodivergent, who tend to think their way through problems, right? That when I'm presented with some obstacle, I want to think about it, run scenarios in my head and examine and break it down into elements and relate it to other things and come up with a solution and then enact the solution. I don't want to just be like, I don't know what to do, but I'm going to try something, because what if I fail? Like you just said in the chat, right? I don't want people to expect something from me, because what if I fail? It's that fear of failure, which again, we all have, but like it seems like everybody knows something I don't statement. There are certain statements people just don't say out loud very much. So even though it's pretty universal, I can't say it's absolutely universal, because how would I know? But in my experience, I've never said something like that to somebody and they've been like, no, I don't know what you're talking about. Everybody has areas in which they feel like other people know secrets that they don't know. Overthink it, yeah. Everybody fears failure. That's what failure is. It's you want to accomplish something and you don't. By definition, I don't want that. I wanted the thing I was trying to do. So what is the recipe for imposter syndrome? That's the part at the beginning. Well, maybe that's not what you mean by recipe. I was going to say the recipe for imposter syndrome is believing that other people can do things that you can't, or that other people think that you should do things or should be able to do things that you can't. What can I do or change to feel better? So one is deal with whatever perceived shortcoming you have. If it's, I feel like I don't know how to do this aspect of my job, right? I got a new job as a teacher. Oh, is there medicine that you can take? I am not a psychiatrist. So I'm actually like, no, I'm misunderstanding something. Can you clarify for me what I'm misunderstanding? I'll talk while you're doing that. I'm trying not to distract you, but I also don't want to just sit here quietly. In what way can I act so that the imposter syndrome gets better or goes away? Yeah, okay. So a few different ways to talk about that. And we'll start with what I think most people are going to be looking for, which is like the broader, more general stuff. But then there's also things that you can specifically do in a given situation in which you are feeling imposter syndrome. But yeah, if you want to feel less imposter syndrome, it's about closing this gap we were talking about earlier between my perception, my estimation of my own ability or value or whatever, and my perception of what I should be able to do or what value I should hold. So one way to do that is to start here. And that's a great thing to do when there's something like concrete to point at. You know, it's everybody else can do their taxes and I can't do my taxes. You can learn how to do your taxes. That's a thing that you can do, right? And that closes the gap a bit. Another thing that you can do is to have conversations with other people to be authentic. If I wish, I would love it if I could just say all this that I've been saying right now, and that switches something in everybody's brain and they're like, oh, everybody else struggles as much as I struggle. That's not going to happen. It's not a true statement either. We can't compare struggles in that way. But even if I was able to relay it accurately, me telling you that is not going to change anything. If it does, great. Or me, not that it doesn't change anything, but it doesn't resolve it. What will is learning to be authentic and vulnerable with people. And I'm not saying to do that all the time, because you should not, because some people you're not safe with to be vulnerable. And that doesn't even mean that maybe they're bad people. It's just they don't know you and you don't know them. Why would you want to be vulnerable around them, right? But starting with the people that you already feel the most safe and comfortable with, you talk about this stuff. You talk about your experience of it, your perception of it. I feel like I'm the only one who doesn't know how to just stop worrying about whether somebody didn't like what I said. I keep worrying about that constantly, and nobody else is. What's wrong with me? Because a lot of the time, if you can be vulnerable and authentic about that, other people will respond in kind. And a lot of the time they're going to say, yeah, actually, that's my experience too. So that starts to bring this side closer, right? That what I'm aiming for, what I thought I was supposed to be doing, isn't actually possible. Nobody does that. And then we bring it down here. So that's kind of the more broad way, like one of those two things. Either you change your perception of yourself by changing your actual capabilities, or another way is to look at yourself as though you are somebody else, right? I feel like an academic failure because I struggle to get things in on time. But if you look at my grades, it's all A's. And if you look, I'm not saying this about me myself as an example. I did well academically, but no one else would know. They see A's, they see college degrees, whatever on paper. So you can try and examine yourself in that way and start to connect some dots like that too. But more, we talk about this too, is like self-esteem, right? I want to feel good about myself, or what's the word I'm blanking on? I keep thinking self-actualization, and that's not the word. Self-efficacy. Self-efficacy is a person's estimation of their own ability to learn and grow and accomplish something. Not who they are currently, but their ability to change and do something that they want to do. The best way to increase self-esteem and self-efficacy is to experience more success, which means either shifting what you're trying to do into realms that you have more success in or have had more success in the past, or develop your ability to successfully accomplish whatever you're trying to accomplish. Notably, get support, because that's almost always involved in this stuff. If I think I should be doing better than I am, I'm probably not talking to anybody about what I'm experiencing because I'm ashamed. I think I should be doing better than I am. I don't want them to know. I'm trying to fool them. The more you do that, the worse it will get, because you're actually doing what you're worried about doing, right? You're actually fooling other people into thinking that you're capable of something that you're not capable of. So you're reinforcing your own fear, and it gets worse and worse. Talk to other people, get support. The only way to get better at anything is to get more information about that thing. And you do that by doing the thing or by talking to somebody who has done the thing. That's it. There's no magic third way, because I think that's the secret that we're all talking about. What is this secret everybody else knows? We're referring to some idea that they could have learned something or developed something, not by doing it, experimenting with it, and kind of struggling and making mistakes and learning like we do, and not by getting information and whatever from other people, because that's getting help, and they're not getting help. It's just me that needs help. So there must be some secret third option of how they could have learned how to do this. It's just knowledge implanted into their brain or soul or whatever from birth. Doesn't exist. So the more we talk to other people, the more we realize that. Smaller chunks, I guess. Yeah, smaller steps. Really, so that is about taking something that's difficult for you to accomplish and making it into something that you can accomplish. And yeah, that's a great way to do it. And there's lots. I mean, we could go into pretty much anything in executive functioning in terms of like, how do you make something difficult into something that's easier? Or how do you change yourself so that something that is difficult becomes easier? Or how do you get help to make it, etc. But yeah, you attack each individual thing in its individual way. Imposter syndrome itself, what I was mentioning earlier, is that if somebody's talking about imposter syndrome, the only thing we know for sure is that they are aware of the concept and the language of imposter syndrome. We don't know what they mean necessarily, and etc. Well, if someone's aware of that language and that concept, and they're using it in reference to themselves, it means that they're looking at a bunch of different experiences and looping it all up into a pattern, right? Because if it was just one experience where I felt this, I wouldn't talk about it it wouldn't be that important to me to even explore and learn about the concept of imposter syndrome. It's got to be that I've had several experiences, and I think that there's some connective tissue there, some correlation, and the correlation is me. I'm the thing that has made it so that in all these different experiences, I felt bad about what I'm capable of, right? So we can attack each of those experiences as an individual thing rather than talking about imposter syndrome as a pattern. Well, do this. And that's where we get into those specific things, like break something down into smaller chunks, get help, schedule things out, monitor your energy levels, and all the kinds of executive functioning things that everybody talks about and the stuff that we talk about. Yeah. That's how you take something that you can't do and turn it into something that you can do. Importantly, a lot of those strategies are intended to help people do something without getting help. And that sometimes is a good thing, right? Like sometimes I don't want to have to get help, to brush my teeth every morning or whatever. But how do you define help, right? Like, yeah, I don't want someone to do it for me, but is talking to somebody about, hey, do you have any ideas? Does that help? So a lot of these things, break it down into small chunks, make a to-do list, make a calendar, good things, valuable things, things that I do, things that I help people learn how to do, you individualize it to people. And we just always want to keep an eye on cost and value. Am I doing something that is pretty costly where there is another option of just getting some support and that option is less costly and I just haven't considered it because I'm not allowed to get support? Because again, when you do that, when you get support, you get more insight into other people's processes and realize that they're not aliens and neither are you. At least as far as I know. That was a bad joke. The other thing, the other category of thing that you can do is in the particular moment where you're experiencing imposter syndrome, you can do the same kinds of things that we talk about with any experience, any subjective experience that you're not liking. You're feeling anxious or you're feeling whatever. You can't stop thinking about a thing. You can't think about it less. You can think about other things more. Yeah, I will stop struggling so much by seeking support. Yeah, and of course, we're talking in big general terms, right? And it's not always possible to seek support, or maybe it's theoretically possible, but prohibitively expensive, right? Yeah, other points of view. Yeah. Talking to people, consensus building, reality checking, this is what humans do. One of the weird things that we've talked about, I think we've talked about in the past, is that the brain does not have a mechanism that allows it to distinguish between something it's perceiving that originated in physical stimuli in the environment and something that it's perceiving that originated in cognition or memory or whatever, right? That our experience of those things internally are the same. What makes those things different is two things. One, logic or reason, right? Like if I look out my window and I visualize a dragon flying through the sky, I'm pretty positive that that's not actually there, because logically I can follow the chain of events and be like, I don't think that would really, I'm figuring it out that way. The other thing, if that doesn't work, is what we call reality checking, which is literally just talking to other people. So I know I used a more ridiculous example, but let me use one that's probably more relevant to people's lives. Is I'm sitting here, I'm focused on something, and out of the corner of my eye, I see something, some kind of movement or something, I'm not quite sure. And I look over there and I don't see anything, but was it just like a shadow? Did something reflect something out the window, or was it a bug or a mouse? And I don't know. And I can't use logic to dictate which it was, because logically either of those things could be true, and I don't have evidence to support one over the other. So what am I going to do? One of two things. Either I'm going to start looking for new evidence. This is assuming that it bothers me that it might be a mouse, right? Like if I don't care whether it's a mouse or a shadow, I'm not going to think about it. But assuming I'm scared of mice and don't like them, right? Then I got to look around and I got to gather more evidence so that I can start to logically prove to myself, oh, wait, there's a hole there. Oh, something's chewed up here. It was a mouse. And now I know, right? Or if I don't find any of that stuff, then I might say, okay, I don't think it was a mouse because I feel like I'd see something. So that's looking for evidence to make the logic chains work, right? Or if somebody else is in the room with me, I'll just say, did you see that? What was that? I saw something over there. Was that a mouse or was that a shadow? And here's the thing. If that person says, yeah, I saw that, it was a mouse, then I'm going to say, my brain is going to say, I knew it. Thank you. Oh, crap. What do I do? Crap. It was a mouse. And if that other person says, yeah, I saw it, it was just a shadow, I'm going to say, oh, thank goodness. Okay. I knew it. I knew it wasn't a mouse. It was just a shadow. Either way, the only new information we're getting is the other person's opinion, right? Their report of what they observed. But our brain responds to it by saying, yep, whatever you say, it was reality. Unless I have a personal experience or some logic that blocks that. So generally speaking, this is a huge part of why therapy or coaching is a separate process, but with some overlap because it's talking to another person, in relationship over time. There's a huge part of why therapy is useful. It's not that the therapist can figure your life out. And I know a lot of therapists will talk about that. I'm not trying to take away anything. The value is in talking to another person and sharing some of the things that you're too afraid to share elsewhere, that you feel too vulnerable and exposed because what if this one is something that's unique to you? It's kind of that joke, right? Like, oh, we all sometimes, I don't know, what's that ridiculous, like, well, okay, here's a specific joke from a show called New Girl that my wife and I watch sometimes, where one of the characters who lives, as roommates with other characters is wearing somebody else's underwear. And they're like, what? You do that? And he's like, yeah, come on, we all wear each other's underwear. And everyone else is like, no. He's like, yeah, you guys are lying. Like, there's a reason that there's that joke of putting something out there because I felt safe putting it out there, because even though it's weird and whatever, I just assume that we all do it and we all don't talk about it. But then if it turns out I am the only one, oh God, how much shame and whatever am I dealing with now, right? By the way, if you're worried that your therapist is judging you, you should talk to your therapist about that. Whatever the reasoning is, it's not about whether they are or not. If you're worried about what your therapist thinks of you or that they're judging you, it means that you don't feel completely safe in that relationship to be vulnerable, to be exposed, to say whatever. It means you are, for whatever reason, your brain is still finding value in trying to predict what they might do. So you're putting effort in still to being careful about editing what you're saying. And I'm not saying that it's definitely not possible to drop that altogether completely forever. But the idea is to get as close to it as possible, as much as possible, and to drop it completely at least sometimes. So worth exploring. Anyway, yeah, that's reality checking. How are you supposed to know what somebody else's experience is without them telling you about it? So you can assume, oh, everybody finds this so easy because no one's complaining about it. But you're also not complaining about it because you think you're the only one that's struggling with it. So you don't want to reveal that to everybody. But what if they're also the only ones they also think they're the only ones struggling with it, and so they're not revealing it to you? And if you could talk to them about it, it might turn out, oh, no, my experience that I was questioning myself and my own interpretation and my own sense of reality and perception, whatever, turns out that it sounds like there's at least some validity to it. So maybe I'm not so weird and whatever after all. Yeah, we're consensus builders. That's what we do. And this isn't about like ethical or moral, like that's what we're supposed to do or it's good to do that, although I do believe those things. It's just purely talking about how the human brain works, what we are able to do, what we are capable of doing, what we must inevitably do. You have to build your understanding of the world by getting other people to share some element of their understanding of the world with you. Even language itself, right? You learn that from somebody. I think just generally, I want to rephrase that. I was going to say, whenever I do that, I say what I was going to say anyway, because I don't like being like, never mind, you don't get that thought. What I was going to say is I think people just generally forget that like human babies are as vulnerable and incompetent and whatever as they are. We forget, we don't think of ourselves as having once been babies. And I stopped because I don't want to phrase it that way, because I don't know what other people think, and I'm not trying to criticize. Instead, I should say, I think it's helpful to me to think about human development from the jump, right? And it's a lot easier for me because I have a baby. I have a 5-month-old and an almost 3-year-old and an almost 6-year-old at home. So I get reminders of this constantly. But I don't think that's necessary. I can paint a picture. That's what we're doing here. Human babies, can't do anything. Can't do anything. We literally could not survive as a species if we weren't each person who survives, infancy, if we weren't taken care of. We have to be. 5 months already. I know it goes fast, right? Feels like just yesterday, especially when you are busy with work and busy with kids and not getting a lot of sleep. And, 5 months already, man. That's making me wistful. No, so just like, this is a little bit out of my realm, but I'll share what I know. That it seems to be that the thinking is, that I'm aware of, that in order for us to be able to do what we're doing, we have to have giant heads, right? Comparatively, because our brains are pretty big proportionately compared to the rest of our body. And the big gateway there is, well, we can develop in utero, all animals, no, all mammals develop in utero, but we have to get out. And so, as kind of a bit of an evolutionary workaround or something, I don't know how you'd want to describe it, that human gestation, pregnancy is 9 months, 10 months, and then they come out, because if it was much longer, the head would get too big. Our brains are too big, which require skulls and heads that are too big to come out of the birth canal without causing problems. But we effectively continue to develop, not effectively, we do continue to develop outside of the womb, right? After being born. A lot of people will talk about the first 3 months of a child's life as the 4th trimester, that ideally that would all still be happening in utero. It's just that we can't, because we're trying to optimize and maximize head size and brain size, whatever, over the course of evolution. Generally speaking, the longer that an organism has to develop, the better the outcome will be. But the more costly the development process is. So we want to talk about extended adolescence and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, because the longer you are able to be taken care of, the more your resources are free for you to be able to explore and grow and develop, instead of having to just deal with problems that are coming up. So theoretically, that means that you get to explore things that aren't urgent, that don't really matter, or at least don't matter in ways that people who are not you can determine, or that we can predict, or whatever, right? That, you get to play video games, or you get to talk on the phone with your friends, or you get to hang out at the park, or whatever. But we don't know what information, what experiences, how that's impacting you in ways that might be helpful, because we don't know what it will be. If we did, we would call it urgent and important. We'd say, you have to learn this because we know this is important later. But if we did that, if each person only explored and experienced and noticed and thought about things that other people already identified as important, then we collectively would not progress. How would we know or do anything new if we were all just doing the same things, right? So I don't know. It's interesting to me to think about that literally the way that our entire species is constructed, the way that each of us starts life, is based on this premise that we as humans will care for one another in some way. And obviously that's not always true. And I'm not trying to say, like, let's hold hands and sing Kumbaya. But I am trying to say, the older we get, the further we get from those experiences of being young and being new and needing help, the less we think about it, the more we forget that we needed help. And we start to construct lives where we are pretty comfortable navigating over time And again, not everybody fluctuations, but over time we construct our lives so that they fit us, that something that sucks, we try to resolve it and get rid of it. Something that's awesome, we try to keep it and get more of it. Over time, we get better at navigating our lives without support. And so we start to forget that support is natural. And even in our constructed little lives, we're still getting a lot of it. We just don't notice it anymore, right? It isn't about the person. Imposter syndrome requires that you think that the outcome, the experience, the observed reality that some person goes through is based on who that person is as an individual and not much else, right? That they're successful because of who they are, and I'm not successful because of who I am. And we forget to look at the context. We look at it more for ourselves than for other people, but even for ourselves, we forget. So a little bit more philosophical there at the end, I guess. There was some more practical stuff I hope in there in terms of talking to people and targeting the skills and treating each instance as its own thing as opposed to just this big overarching thing. Because remember, there's utility in like grouping things up into concepts and being able to convey complex experiences very simply. But if we go too far, it's hard to, I could group everything up into just saying we want to be happy, but saying be happy is not very useful, right? Cool. Well, thank you all for being here. This was fun. Thank you in the chat there. It's nice to have a conversation with you. I will be back either by myself or with somebody else a week from now, Wednesday, 1 p.m. Central Standard Time to 2 p.m. Central Standard Time. Appreciate it. Bye.